So it's been 20 years since the case broke open.
Wow.
Certainly not 20 years since you prosecuted, but you're moving there. Do these two cases remain the biggest cases of your careers?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I did maybe 50 murder cases. This was probably the one that was the hardest to do as evidence and bring to the court. But yeah, I guess it'd probably be the biggest for me. Sure. I don't know about Tom.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done a lot of murder cases.
Death penalty cases.
Death penalty cases, and but this was the case that I spent the most time with, and became a huge part of my life, including my family's life during the period of time. I mean, we spanned over with the grand jury, and then ultimately with trial.
Was it almost 2 years of the grand jury?
Yeah, all I can say is at the very end of it, I was exhausted, and I know you were too. I had spent so much time, emotionally, physically, intellectually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that regard, I would say it had the biggest impact on.
The trial is probably the easiest part. I mean, for work-wise.
Yeah.
Because everything is behind the scenes in preparation, but in the trial, it's just us doing our courtroom thing. But I agree with Tom. It was very draining.
So the trial might have been the easiest because you guys had spent years getting your ducks in a row, but there has to be this sense of anxiety once you're in trial that you're going to lose the whole thing.
Well, because it got such headlines, you didn't want to look stupid.
Yeah.
And you wanted to make sure you crossed your T's, you dotted your I's. We represented the office. We were not only the family, but the office and the people of this county, and we wanted to do our best.
How often do you two think about the Riots cases anymore? I mean, I know for years it was your daily thing at work, but then even after the convictions, I know you were it both came up. I imagine for both of you fairly regularly. I think you told me that in 2004. What about now?
I still think about it, and I think kind of the anniversary has raised it. And I think my perspective at this point in time is so much different than it was when I first was involved in the case. Now I kind of look at it and I can reflect upon it fondly. It's like, I think it's like childbirth. If we remembered the pain of going through it, we wouldn't do it again. At least that's what women tell me. But now I can look back at it fondly. But when I was done with it, I don't know how you felt. I was
ready to close the
tired.
door. Close the door, move on to something else.
I didn't even want to think about it.
Right.
But
the anniversaries bring it up.
Yeah.
Every year.
But I think you can say to yourself, and I can say to myself, at the very end, we did something good.
We did something very good, and we did something that nobody thought would happen.
What happened, yeah.
I remember the first meetings we had, and we were talking about division of labor and how we're going to do it and strategize, and we're going to have to do a grand jury. Of course, we'd never done one before, so how do you do a grand jury? But once that ball got rolling, then you kind of got immersed. But until then, just initially, it looked like a mountain. How the hell are we going to prove this case?
Yeah, right.
32 years after the fact, the first thing was, let's pop the bodies out of the ground and see what we can find. And then the grand jury, hundreds of witnesses in front of the grand jury. And we met on a regular basis with all those people and got to know them. I mean, then, but I haven't seen any of them since. But, just the organizing, just getting it started and trying to figure what do we have to do to get from this point to that point. That was a nightmare.
Yeah, it was tough.
Do you guys have a memory each, that might be the strongest for you? It doesn't have to be from trial, it could be from the investigation, it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. Just that when you think about the Riots cases, it's the thing that comes to your mind first.
I think about Pickle Nose on a witness stand. I just said, well, I expect him to say Freeland shot. Who all shot? He says, well, we all did. I went, excuse me?
There's a Matlock moment.
And was that Smickle?
No,
or Pickle Nose? That was Pickle Nose.
Pickle Nose. And it was like, yeah, there's a man. I went, what? What'd you say?
I'll tell you what, only because you mentioned that, we had a bit of a Matlock moment with examining Charlie's character witness, and it was Art Gladfelter, who, I didn't have anything that I was going to be able to dig into him with. And then, I was paying attention. He goes, well, I said, why did you write the letter? And he said, well, we thought they were going to riot again. And I said, who's they? And he stopped dead in his tracks, didn't know. I think he realized, like, oh, oops.
Yeah.
And so that was my kind of similar situation. But I do remember, hell, as it could have been you. Right after the trial was over and the jury delivered its verdict, and I know everyone was so, what about Charlie? And I, at that point, I'm like, it's done. Yeah. And someone asked me out back. I guess I was coming from the Squirrel Hut. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And so what are you going to go do now? And I'm going to go to bed. I am going to go to bed. I was just exhausted. Yeah. I just couldn't take, I was like, oh, let me just go to bed.
Do you guys ever dream about it? About the cases?
No. Yeah. And I really didn't want to think about it for a long time. There was a couple of things that, I can remember distinctly afterwards, after we had finished the case, I think someone had written what a waste of money it was, et cetera. And I remember thinking, if you saw your daughter being put in the ground and someone said, it's probably going to be a little bit too expensive to investigate this case, would you ever make such a statement?
Yeah.
And
these are lives. These any murders. It's a serious life. It doesn't matter how much it costs.
Yeah.
And
really, if we start making,
we just spend it.
If we start making determinations based upon finances, obviously there's a consideration, but you as a prosecutor would have to be willing to tell a family member, you know what, she's just not worth it.
Yeah, but I know Stanley getting the bills.
Oh, I know.
I made 16 trips all over the country finding witnesses, and then we found every witness we looked for except one guy in Florida who's dead.
He was dead.
He died like 2 weeks beforehand, but the expense of taking all those costs and just going to. But we try to do it all at once. Let's go to Denver and jump over to San Francisco, down to Los Angeles, and da-da-da-da-da. And while we're here, some guy had written me a letter from Supermax confessing to a murder. And I said, well, let's just go see him while we're here. So we did. We jumped over.
Is that the Georgia guy?
No, some guy from New York
who
claimed he killed somebody. All he wanted was a ruse. He just wanted to get out of Supermax. Because let me tell you, that place it's like 10 floors and it all goes down. And we walked in there and had permission from the U.S. attorney there. And we walked in there. We were coming from Colorado, and we of course golfed on the way. And walked in there in shorts, and not in our prison, You had to go back to the parking lot, put pants on. But then he took through the level, and took Dairyman 2 minutes of interviewing him to find that the guy was full of crap, and we were out of there. But
I know you've told me the Dickie Rasco story, but we never got it on tape, and it's such a great story. Can you guys tell it again?
What about Dickie Rasco?
Was it Dickie Rasco, the one where you were in the Boston?
That was me, yeah. That was me. That was, other than Aiken, I think that was the trip I took.
You and Van Green.
Yeah.
I remember getting the bill for that trip.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, Bill, but I did things economically. So anyway, we went up there and we had the Boston police helping us out, and we spent the day staking out the train station or the bus station. I can't remember whether, I think it was bus maybe. And we didn't see him. And then finally we saw him, and we took him in. He was willing to speak to us, and this was quite fortuitous because it was Debbie. He was the one who assaulted Debbie Flinchball's dad.
Right.
And Stanley was very, very adamant that he wanted us to come to a conclusion with that for Debbie. And he kind of gave it all up and admitted it all, and that was that. So But it was a full day in Boston, staking out, most boring thing in the world, looking at a bus station all day. And thank God they let us smoke in the car, because being a smoker, if I had had to spend 8 hours in front of a bus station without being able to smoke, that would have been quite difficult.
So that would be the less glamorous part of being a prosecutor.
Yeah, the Boston police was very good. They were very good with us, though. They were nice folks. And then we took them out for the 2 officers that were assigned to us. We took them out for dinner afterwards. So
we had similar with Pickle Nose. We were looking for Pickle Nose once we got going. Found out he left town. Last where he was in New Orleans. I said, let's go to New Orleans. So and Derriman couldn't stand to fly, so it was Derriman and Keith Stone and Rodney and I rented a van and drove to New Orleans.
Oh my!
Oh yeah, from here. Pulled in, got a cheap hotel somewhere, and he said, "Listen, we got hooked up with a local police officer," which is another story. And he said, "Let's just start checking homeless shelters." So we went to one. No, he was here, but we're not here now. So we go to the second homeless shelter. I remember sitting inside looking at the log, and I hear Derriman out in the street go, "Hey, Pickle Nose, how you doing?" He just walked right into us. He said, "Huh?" He said, "You're under arrest for murder."
Oh, God.
But the officer who took us around was some young kid. Remember when they had all the riots in New Orleans, and they were accused of police brutality, of beating up some little old guy on the streets. Well, they indicted that officer for that. And it happened to the same officer who took us around, and he ended up killing himself before he went to trial. Wow. It was just a young kid, like a 30-year-old detective. Wow. But yeah, we had our Dickie Roscoe moment.
And you mentioned perspective a little earlier, Tom, and that's on my list. That to ask whether either of you of your perspectives have changed in the last 20 years about the trials or the results of the trials. I mean, I know sometimes you go through something, and then 20 years later, when you look back on it, you don't necessarily view it the same way. Is that?
No, I look at it being our best work, his work and our best work, and marshaling all those witnesses together, marshaling like 500 grand jury witnesses. I think it was 497, and just picking out which ones we're going to use and to try to prove the case. You get elements you have to prove, and they said people don't understand the work that went into it. The trial actually is anticlimactic. I mean, it isn't for the public, but from our perspective, all the work is just like pushing that in, and no.
So, any second thoughts about Charlie? Was there anything you could have done different in that case, or would have done different with Charlie's charges?
I don't think so. I think the victory there was a couple of victories that Bill Kostopoulos had. One of them was getting all the defense attorneys to agree we all go down together. Because by doing that...
Your jury was out a while, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was Charlie that hung him up.
Yeah, and actually we polled the jury afterwards, and they said, well, if he had been charged with conspiracy, which he was, technically speaking, there's a built-in conspiracy, they would have convicted him. So
Charlie Robertson, our former mayor.
Yeah. But Bill Kostopoulos, who at the conclusion of it, what a great guy Bill is. Mm-hmm. But his major success was getting everyone to agree to go to trial, and getting the defense attorneys to say, okay, we're all going down together. Because some of those witnesses that were represented by other attorneys had very damning information against Charlie. But because they all kind of stuck together, they couldn't take the witness stand, and I couldn't cross-examine them because of that on the information that they had given to the grand jury. So Bill's biggest success, he's a smart man. He got everyone to kind of, let's all do this together and let's stick together. And, that was huge for Charlie Robertson, because a lot of those witnesses had very damning information about Charlie.
They couldn't get it out legally.
I couldn't get it out, yeah.
One of the defendants subsequently told me, and I can't say who because it was an off-the-record thing, but told me that he felt that all the defense attorneys were concerned about was making sure Charlie got the best defense, and that maybe the rest of the defendants weren't getting the best defense from their lawyers, that it seemed to be the focus of everybody was on Charlie. Do you think that's a fair statement or unfair?
Well, I think that's an unfair statement, because none of those attorneys that were involved,
They're smudges.
no, no one would ever do that. I think he did benefit from, Charlie just benefited incidentally from the fact that they all kind of stuck together and said, okay, we need to all defend this. And that's wherein he got. But there is a common misconception that we wanted Charlie. We didn't want Charlie so much as we wanted the shooters. I mean, Charlie added an incredible, difficult wrench into the machine. It chalked everything up.
Clotted it.
And, you know, it would have been a far more streamlined trial and easier for us to prosecute had he not been involved. Everyone thought, oh, these guys are just out to get Charlie. Charlie mucked up the works. But he was indicted. And, you know, what are we going to do? We're going to say, no, the grand jury heard 2 years of testimony. We're not going to follow through with it. So we did follow through with it. It made things a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
And people thought, oh, you guys just want Charlie? No, we wanted Bobby Messersmith more than anything. Because Bobby Messersmith not only shot Lillie Belle Allen, but he had shot another individual earlier,
Talkany
Sweeney, and then a couple of years later, he was prosecuted for firing a weapon at another individual. I mean, Bobby Messersmith was a murder waiting to happen. He's the one that we wanted. We wanted the shooters. And we knew, based upon our evidence, that Bobby was likely the shooter. And he bragged about it, and it was sickening. And he didn't learn his lesson. Because then later on he did something. I mean, that flashpoint for that riot was Bobby Messersmith. His shooting at Talkany Sweeney.
I think the public's perception was that Charlie might have been the flashpoint with the allegations of the handing out of ammunition.
Well, but I'm talking about the riot started because Talkany Sweeney was talking to a police officer.
George Smith.
And Bobby Messersmith from
White Bridge came
across the bridge fired at him and shot him.
Yep.
And then the rumor got out that he had been, meaning Talkany Sweeney, had been shot by a police officer. And based upon what had happened in '68, that was a huge conflagration, and that is kind of what spiraled out of control. Now, Charlie Robertson, of course, by handing out ammunition
inflaming
the crowd, essentially said, hey guys, it's okay. I mean, his quote was, if N-word, you see an N-word, shoot.
You know, the testimony was that that family turned down, they made that wrong turn down there. They thought they were walking into a gauntlet because there were people on both sides of the street lined with guns. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like to be in that car? And go up and stall in the tracks, and you know, and the pictures of that car was shot up like the Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, I know.
It was horrendous.
I think it's surprising that only Lillie Belle Allen died.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It was, however, a '60s Cadillac, solid steel. You know, solid steel on the interior of the trunk. I mean, thank God it was a trunk because you had multiple layers of steel, and but.
And you think that saved the other people?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
I mean, that thing was lit up.
Because she wasn't the only person being shot at.
No, that car was riddled with bullets.
Yeah.
Riddled with bullets. It's amazing.
Do you guys think that the trials and convictions have had a long-term effect on the York community? Not on the victims, survivors, or on, you know, police and prosecutors who have lived this, but just on the general public. Do you think that the impact of the trials and convictions has stayed with the community, and if so, how?
For those people that are old enough to remember it, but you have to remember most of the crime out here, all these damn young kids. I mean, they don't even know who we are, yet alone who Lillie Belle Allen and Henry Schaad were. So the people of our age, or the people who were alive at the time, I'm sure did have an impact because it was closure for them too. But beyond that, I don't think anybody else thinks about it.
Well, and that's another question I have, that you have this whole generation of people who are now young adults who either, you know, weren't quite born or who were very young during the trials. And do you think that this is just something they've forgotten and maybe learn about in school and that's
just history? Yeah, that's history.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
I don't know. I mean, I think this generation, you know, my kids are in their 20s, so Their generation sees a lot less in terms of color, I think, and a lot less in terms of sexual orientation. I think they're very, very accepting that, but they don't realize that it was just around the corner where these things happened. Like sometimes we don't realize that it was just around the corner that the South was completely segregated. Mm-hmm. It still was when I was born. I mean, I was a little kid. And so generationally, each generation becomes more and more tolerant and less apt to understand it wasn't quite so long ago. I mean, the amazing thing to me is that we went from the 60s to, 40 years later, an African-American president. I mean, talk about a huge progression.
George Wallace probably rolling his
yeah, right,
exactly.
I mean, you had people even during the 80s. I mean, you had David Duke.
Yeah.
And then you had Obama. I mean, that's good. Now, I am by no stretch of the imagination trying to argue that this is a settled subject. This is always going to be a nagging subject to this
for anybody who's different, whether they're African American, Hispanic,
anything,
Nigerian,
anything.
You're different than us. It's like the old Dr. Seuss books. You're different than us. All people look like us, and then they look different, and that's human nature.
Yeah, it's too bad because when you're young, you like different. And I think when you get older, you like what you know.
Or you don't know. Like my son doesn't know the difference. He doesn't know that people are different.
Exactly. But I think for purposes of this community, I think this community benefited from the prosecution because I especially think the African American community, there was so little trust with the system. And there was so little trust that we were trying to solve both cases. When you tell a prosecutor there's been murder, the prosecutor doesn't say, well, who was it? What did they do? What were they? What color were they? A prosecutor, I mean, okay, there's a murder. That's what they're primed for, and a murder needs to be solved. And a victim needs to be avenged through the legal system. I don't mean that in terms of violence or anything, but so. I think by the community recognizing that we went into this, we were going to solve both of them. We were going to put equal attention to both of them. That the community was saying, okay, there are people in the system that care. And they don't judge us based upon the color of our skin, but rather...
Fact related.
Yeah.
We look at Chaucer murder cases, used to. That's what you live for. So.
Well, that would certainly be a lasting effect in the community then.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think so.
For people that was alive, that even understood.
Yeah.
But see, nowadays there's so many generations have gone by.
Yeah.
Do you think riots could happen again in the city like they happened before, whether race or over race or police, or I don't think
we're that volatile right now. Right now it's just being shot up. Everything's being shot. 14-year-old kids are shooting other 14-year-old kids and whatever.
I don't know. I have some concerns about, and I don't think it would break along racial lines. I think it might break up along socioeconomic lines. Mm-hmm. Now, sadly, that often, to this day, still breaks to a certain extent along racial lines because there is no economic equality as of yet.
Yep.
There's so many issues, until there's educational equality, until there's available education for everyone, you're always going to have somewhat.
Women,
yeah.
They may cause the riots. Women don't get paid the same scale that men do.
No, I think there's the new us and them breaks along financial lines. And I think it's only gotten worse. And I think it's going to continue to get worse. Now that is also going to break to a certain extent along racial lines.
But it's more economic than...
Yeah, it's economic.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But you don't think it's going to lead to, this, what we saw in '69 probably can't happen again?
I don't know. It's going to be a different, it's going to be different. But there is going to be, we're getting a little bit far afield, but there's going to be a reckoning with this younger group of people and the older group that are our age and maybe even a little bit older.
She can't be much older than me.
But I really do think so, and I think it's going to be driven to a certain extent along racial lines as well, because racial lines is to a certain extent economic lines as well.
Easier
but-
to identify.
but-
Easier to identify.
Yeah, I don't know how it would all play out, but there's the environment, there's economics, and there is a need for some new thought in the process, and so that's just.
And isn't that pretty, I mean, in 1969, was York City residents who were living in poverty, who happened to be black,
Yeah.
who rioted because they were unhappy with what was going on, the people who were making the decisions above them.
Yeah.
And that's not so different from what you were just saying.
Well, yeah, to a certain extent, yeah, but ironically, you've got the people that are almost on a parity level economically with them, rioting with them and fighting them. Talk about an ultimate irony. It's almost like the big people get these lower economic people to fight their battle for them.
Do people still approach either of you about the riots cases to ask you questions or give you an attaboy or to criticize you?
Not me. Maybe you.
I don't think anyone criticizes me anymore. At the time, they did.
They criticized you because of Charlie.
Yeah. But people didn't understand.
They didn't understand.
But not anymore. I went to a presentation where they were, asking people to speak about the riots, and actually Artie Messersmith was there. And of course, when I'm standing on the dais thinking, right in front of me is Artie Messersmith, what's going to happen here? He didn't say anything. Just watched.
They never approached you after?
No, I waved to him. I was like, hey, Artie. But hadn't changed a bit.
You were the guy that sent him to state prison.
He hadn't changed a
We
bit.
send a lot of people to state prison in our job.
Yeah.
Lots.
I assume many people take that personally.
I don't know. I represent most of them now. Most of my client load.
Well, you know what I get? You know what's funny to me sometimes is people say, "Hey, you were a really fair judge. You listened to me."
You did. Well, you always did.
Yeah.
You did listen to people.
Yeah. I was like, well, okay. I mean, I think when I took the bench, everyone thought I was going to be hell bent for leather to put everyone in jail, but
Yeah, you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
You listened. You took the job seriously.
yeah. So
I represent most of the people I locked up.
yeah, I mean, they come back to you because
Show me the same attention you showed me then.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, but I.
So, we talked about how the idea of the riots and the prosecutions, it's basically fading from the memory of the public.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a good idea. I mean, I think people ought to remember
I
it.
agree.
And why should people ought to remember it?
Well, People Magazine, that thing that they did brought it all back to. And I had people approaching us, saying, "You remember the People Magazine investigation? It was last year."
Yeah, last year I think it was. Yeah.
Where they had that show on television, and they had people then showing interest and asking questions. But
Yeah. People need to remember history. Hey, I'm a history major, so people that don't
You
learn
forget
from history
you
and
do
don't
the same
study
lessons.
history,
make the same
wow, they
mistakes.
make the same mistakes. I would be so thankful if some of our government leaders really took an active interest in history.
Their decisions would be different.
Absolutely.
I don't disagree. Is there anything either of you want to say that I haven't asked, or that you don't think you've been asked, or feel like the public ought to know at this point?
Not really.
I'll tell you what, no one knows the full story of how it, I'll tell you, it was just how the whole thing broke. And
Well, I remember when we first started up, I remember I had to beg to be on to get on the team. We were back in the squirrel hut behind it, and we were talking, and Stan was talking to the detectives, and Tom said, "I'm going to take the lead prosecution in the Lillie Belle case." I said, "Well, I want a part of this." well, then you can go ahead and do Schaad, because you got no witnesses. I remember you saying, you got no witnesses. I said, oh, really? And then we started this grand jury. I'm telling you,
Well, I'll tell you what. My position
grand jury.
My position always was that you will get no one talking in the African American community
Absolutely.
unless they know that you're serious about solving Lillie Belle Allen.
Yep.
And that was my position.
People didn't think
because
you were going to do it. People didn't think
Yeah.
you were going to solve, and that was really the whole key to it. They didn't think that we were going to actually solve that murder.
Yeah, and I said, as soon as they see that we're serious about Lillie Belle Allen, people will be willing to talk in the African American community, because until that time, they're not going to trust that we care. And I think when they saw what happened, that we did start getting people to cooperate, and the case did open up, and Bill luckily was willing to wait and kind of give me a wide berth, but
I just
things.
set the table and
Yep.
let them go. I think the public needs to know the amount of work that went into just getting it to trial. It was just unbelievable amount of witnesses.
And something that is unparalleled in either of your careers, and probably in
Yeah.
much of the history of the York County District
Sure.
Attorney's Office, right?
It was an expensive proposition to do this case.
I had some tough cases though too. I mean, Whitman was really hard for me.
Your death penalty case.
My death penalty, Dowling was very hard for me.
And was the one that just got overturned? Not to remind you.
Thank you, Montalvo.
Yeah. I had one death penalty. I got one death penalty, and he got overturned, and he got a retrial.
I had 3.
Yeah. And
3.
I remember Ari Weitzman.
I think I had the most in PA for a
Probably.
prosecutor.
And it's Charles Malloy, and he ended up getting life without parole. But Ari Weitzman did the smartest thing anybody could do. He wouldn't have his defendant testify, but he had him stand up, and his storyline was he was abused as a kid. His mother used to put his hands on a hot plate to punish him, and that's why he's the psychopath that he is today. And all Ari did was and Judge Kennedy allowed him to stand up and go like this to the jury, and all he saw was scar tissue. And the jury started crying. I said, well, I just lost that death penalty. No right then, before they even went out.
Jeez.
But you have those moments. Those are tough cases.
Yeah.
Any murder case is a hard case.
Yeah, they are.
Death penalties are the worst. They are just so draining. He has a lot more polish than I do. I'm always been just a junkyard dog. I mean, you throw something at me, I'm gonna throw it back. It's just who we are. That's why we're Felix and Oscar.
Thank you both, I appreciate it.